Professor Shahid Amin, most welcome. Please start your keynote.
Thank you, Ravikant, and distinguished chairpersons and visitors to this conference. I shall get on with whatever little I have to say straight away. Of course, my grateful thanks to the organizers and to Ravikant for inviting me and making me think about some of the material that I've been engaged with for a long time. I have decided to title this Print, Subversion, Proscription. Now, this is a very general title as far as the period is concerned. But can you see me? Can you hear me?
Yes, very much.
Yeah. But I shall, of course, be focusing on printed material, largely textual, but also some prints during the period 1920s, 30s. Now, subversion, I'll say a couple of things before we come to the proper print, which is something that is printed in a printing press, because that's what draws the ire of the state, because it's not simply what has been written, but the fact that it might circulate. Now, first, subversion. Just a couple of things about subversion. Obviously, subversion, to begin with, is oral. In all languages, there are what linguists have called pronouns of power. Vous, tu in French, aap, tum, tu in Hindi. And in a kind of a hierarchical society, some people say tu to others, others are supposed to say aap. And the very inversion of this, a peasant calling a landlord, tu kya kar raha hai, tune kya kiya, is subversion and is construed as subversion. Hence that popular expression, main teri zaban nikal lunga. So it's the tongue which is the source of speech, which can be very subversive, not by doing very much, but just constructing a sentence, which is not expected to emanate from a person who's subordinate. Subversion is also very much in place with oral dissemination, rumors, which make every hearer a transmitter, and you can't really get hold on it. There are some very interesting words in Hindi and Bhojpuri on and Urdu on rumor. Afwah we all know, but I think that the best word that I came across was udan, something that is really flying around, that is something which is in the air. Subversion can also be through munadi, through circulation, through announcement, through the pasting of posters, which was the case normally before print became widespread. Now, regarding nationalist poetry, which I'll be focusing on a bit more, also on prose. Let me begin with a couple of general statements. One is not born a nationalist. One becomes one. And that is through hearing things, listening to things, and therefore responding to it in an appropriate way. That is why, while we have a lot of nationalist poems, Prabhat Pheri is one of them, new construction, that early in the morning children would go out and sing nationalist songs through the city. Though we have children engaged in nationalist songs, it's interesting and worth noting that there are very few nationalist lullabies. Nationalist lori mere nazdik abhi tak koi aa nahi pai. So it's not nationalism, and the poetry of nationalism is addressed really to adult population. Now I'll focus on the Gandhian moment, as I call it, 1920, 1930, 31, these two movements. Now, there is subversion and proscription of two sorts. One is the prevention of individuals most remarkably Gandhi, from entering a particular area. So Gandhi is not allowed to go to Punjab when the Rowlatt oppression has taken place. Similarly, newspapers that report extensively on the oppression in Punjab during 1919 are confiscated. Entire issues of newspapers are confiscated. Just reporting without any incendiary comments is seen as excuse me, I've got a very bad cough. So it leads to proscription of an entire issue. The very famous Gorakhpur newspaper Swadesh, the 1919 April edition, is proscribed and banned. When we come to the poetry of nationalism, that's when things really get exciting. That's when things get interesting. One could almost say, and that nationalism made poets of a lot of people who were not poets and who would never be poets. So it's not, nationalist poetry is not absolutely first-rate compositions. It is the intensity of the feeling that gets conveyed through poetry that really causes concern. And I don't have to emphasize that poetry touches your heart much more so, much more direct manner than prose does. People have, and our archives, both provincial and national, have produced collections of proscribed pamphlets. They are called variously swatantratasangram pamphlets or deshbhaktigeet, bhavnaएं, hubbul watni, where you will get poetry of indifferent sort combined with some very, very famous poems which are construed in a very, very strong nationalist way, so that there is, in most collections, a lot of collections, you will get Iqbal Sare Jahan Se Acha or Bismill's Sarfaroshi Ki Tamanna. But there are pamphlets and booklets which really the state was very concerned about and proscribed straight away, which were incendiary, quote unquote, in the language of the state. And that is evidence in the very title of these. So you've got booklets of poems with such titles as Gore Kutton Ka Haramipan, The Bastardly Ways of White Dogs, Dumkati Sarkar, that is an inversion of Kipling's notorious phrase of Bandar Log, or Akbar's, and you can relate it to Akbar's satirical verse, whereby he says, Ya ilahi ye kaise bandar hain, Ya ilahi ye kaise bandar hain, irtiqa pe bhi aadmi na hue. That is, there's evolution from apes to human beings, and Akbar Abadi is referring to the Angrez who have not developed into proper human beings and have remained still at the ape level. Now, these are really incendiary statements as far as the colonial state is concerned. A little background: these pamphlets that I've been just alluded to, I'll say something more on them. They are published from small towns. I'm looking at UP, and they are really written by inferior but clever and highly educated poets. This is not Maithili Sharan Gupta really writing, whose writings could be confiscated, but the large number of pamphlets that are now available in the provincial archives, in the national archives, in the British Library are, very powerful poems, but not really by professional poets. And these are largely written, as can be understood, by upper caste males. Very few women poets, very few pamphlets authored by women poets, or very few proscribed pamphlets at that time, not subsequently, in 1920s and 30s, authored by Dalit caste really are to be found in the large collection that we have at various places. And that says something about the nature of leadership and the nature of mobilization. What we find again in these collections, and I'm looking at again 1920s and 30s, is a transition from a non-violent sentiment, and of course non-cooperation is the key modality of that, is non-violence. We see a transition from a non-violent to an abrasive, militant, even violent rubrics or titles. So one could almost trace a progression from, say, Asayog, Swaraj ki Gitanjali, Rashtriya Tufan, now we are getting in there, Gandhi Ghor Sangram, Gandhi ki Top, and even Gandhi ki Nangi Talwar. Now, now these collections are not one long poem, they are a collection of several poems. But the title itself is meant to be subversive. If you call a collection of poems published from Kasganj or Devariya, Gore Kutto Ka Haramipan or Gandhi Ki Nangi Talwar, that's the kind of contradiction in terms. That stray is also meant to draw attention to the state, but also in a very peculiar way, it's supposed to be a mobilizational title. For instance, there is in Dumkati Sarkar, which is a collection of poems, it starts with this couplet: बहुत दिन कर लिया आराम मखमल के गदेलों पे, सुनाऊंगा तुम्हें आज पत्थर और ढेलों पे. That you have been lounging on cushions and so on for long. Now we are going to really make you lie down on clods and stones. So you see that there are the addressee is normally, of course, the peasant or even women in some cases, in a large number of cases, who are to be organized. But the intent is very clearly adversarial, addressed in this case to the Englishman. Now, coming to the iconography, Ravikant, Ravikant will just display some of these illustrations. Ravikant, can we just I'll just go through a set and then say a little bit about each of those illustrations. So let me carry on. So there is a pamphlet which is this will come to later on. Can you just okay, let me just so you look at, this is Vande Mataram Congress ka Bigal or Dukhiya Bharat. Look at the typeface. There is Bharat Mata really dressed as in the guise of Saraswati, because the veena is prominent, and Gandhi is just actually blowing into a megaphone, and four people representing various communities are there. If you look at the small print, it's a pamphlet which has been produced by someone who's not fully in command of Hindi spelling or language. It's produced from Khari Bawli, and the way it is written, it is obviously, it suggests that it is the product of a mind of a person who is not really well versed in Hindi. Could we have the next, please, Ravikant? Shall I just carry on, and then we can show the illustrations later on. Can we get another one, Ravikant? Can you hear me? Okay, I'll just carry on. Can people hear me? Just nod your head, one of you at least. Can you hear me? Yeah, okay. There is some Ravikant, can you get that image that you flashed the first, and I'll just talk about it.
So we are trying to do that. Actually, we are all stuck with some technical issues. That's why it's taking some time.
Okay, then perhaps I should just keep quiet so that and wait for the image to come, because oh God.
Or sir, maybe if you are comfortable, then we can proceed further, and then we can get back to those images, whatever suits you.
Well, I'm not comfortable, as you can see, because I'm coughing my lung out now. But the thing is that I was all right. So I'll just invert. We'll come to the image images that I was going to refer to. One thing that emerges interestingly is that there is a re-referencing of very well-known episodes of mythology or of religious presentation and transposing it onto the nationalist. Now, there is a well-known story of Markandeya, the little child who is a great devotee of Shiva. And Yam tries to come and reclaim him. And Markandeya then hangs on to the iconic image of Shiva, and Yam has to really acquiesce and retreat so that Markandeya can carry on being a very devoted devotee, shall we say, of Shiva. Now that's an image that I'm talking about, because there is a proscribed picture which translates the Markandeya story into a Gandhian movement. It's not Shiva but Gandhi who is blessing, and there's a woman who is tied to Yama through the swantantratasangram, and Yama is trying to lead, which is Angrezi Raj, lead the woman away, but she stands her ground. And this was prescribed because the colonial administration at the UP level, through its Indian subordinates, was able to fathom that this is a subversive way of utilizing and quote-unquote exploiting a religious myth, story, or image onto a new dimension. Now, I want to talk about one other image. I wish we had just stayed with it, which was the first image that Ravikant flashed through. But I'll come to that towards the end. So let me carry on with my argument. That's basically one point that I want to really emphasize is, which gets connected to what I was saying earlier on, that these poems are written by nationalists who obviously are constituted in their consciousness not by an empty idea of nationalist being. They are nationalists, but also upper caste males. Now, what is interesting, we should never forget about it, because we sometimes get so focused on the actual message that we often lose how the structure of Indian society or attitudes towards women or Dalit is also being reflected, as it must, in these purely nationalist, here it is, imagery. But I'll come to that later on. But here is the very interesting picture, which is called Swaraj Ki Ladai. And it is a picture of militant mobilization. This is by one Prabhu Dayal, and it's published by a professional picture merchant. It says, produced by Shyam Sundar Lal, picture merchant, Chowk, Kanpur. It purports to paint a realist picture of the state of the country during the civil disobedience movement of 1932. It opens a page, and that's how the picture is, opens a page from Ramayana, and it titles it Bharat Kand. On one page to the left, Gandhi is portrayed, his kutia hut in the background, and Gandhi is wielding the charkha in a defensive posture. Standing next to him is a satyagrahi, head bent in peaceful pose, about to be clobbered by a policeman crossing over from the side of state power, right-hand side of the page, onto this page symbolically occupied by Gandhi and Nehru. Nehru, interestingly, peculiarly, is portrayed in a somewhat comical avatar of Hanuman, flying in with the Sanjeevani Booty Parvat in one hand and the mace or boycott of English goods in another. Nehru's, in this image of Nehru, its landing site is not a comatose Lakshman who has to be revived with Sanjeevani Booty, but Sita, personified as Azadi, sitting forlornly under a date palm tree, which is peculiar because the date palm tree is normally an Islamic symbol. The bulk of the page has Azadi, literally cornered by an Englishman, Raman, not a 10-headed Dashanan, but a solar topi wearing multi-armed, 15 in number, creature. Each arm designating such instruments of colonial rule as Rai Bahaduri, forge, the might of the sword, handcuffs, ordinance, Criminal Law Amendment Act Section 144, 124A, magistracy, cavalry, police, jail, and so on. So these 15 arms of the state of this new Raman are really arms that are aspects of oppressive colonial rule. On top of this, on counterposing the succor bringing Hanuman Nehru, we have a tiger moth hovering over the top of the page, this plane, occupied by colonial state structure. To locate the picture in space and time as the Qutub Minar and the Imperial Legislative Assembly, in a word, the colonial state, as had been recently ensconced at New Delhi. Now, piquant and overbearing in its topoi, when transmuted into verse, such picturesque exhortation as the one depicting Nehru as Hanuman could be equally forced. Witness this compilation quite widespread between Gandhi and Krishna. I have the Hindi text, but I'm just for easy communication giving you a very, very rough translation, which really takes away from the pungency of the Hindi verse. He played a mellifluous flute, this one deftly charkha plies. He polished off cow's milk, this one favors bakri milk. He had gwalas for companions, now he enlists volunteers. He was known as the butter thief, this one goes by the name of Namak Chor, the salt baron. So that's one point I wanted to make about how well-known imageries and well-known stories from the broadly religious spheres are transmuted and transformed onto portrayal in print of the situation of colonial rule. Now, the last move that I want to make, which refers back while we're waiting for this photograph, to the point I was making, that these poems, nationalists, are not in an empty homogenizing sense of the word nationalist. These are written by nationalist males and basically from a casteist society that is North India. And I'll just make that point as the last point by picking up on two points of this story of casteist and sexist writings within nationalist poetry. There is obviously the question of temperance, the giving up of liquor, which is central to the Gandhian program of 1920. So there are poems written in a very popular Bhojpuri mode on Shrabava or Nisha Bajava, the drunkard. And it says various things that, you get drunk and you puke in the street, you don't take care of your wife, you've lost, total control over your body body functions, etc. But there's a very interesting last line, which says, and I'm not going to use the casteist words that they use, I'll just let the letters speak for them, D and C, scavengers and leather workers, sab madira banawatare, tavana ke pike har khail nisha bajava. Actually, it's not correct that these lowest caste were fermenting liquor. There's another caste that does. But the implication is that these are activities that are confined to the lowest of the low, and you, the drunkard, who belongs to another social category, a higher social category, you're now equating yourself with these lowly people who are part of the nation, whom Gandhi is trying to mobilize as well. The last point, which is about this most iconic of Gandhian imagery, which is charkha and khaddar. Now, again, it's interesting that charkha, while Gandhi himself, this point needs stressing, while Gandhi himself does the remarkable thing as a male of actually plying the charkha all the time. Charkha, as we know, is basically a womanly activity. In India, also spinning was a woman's activity in England, hence the word spinster. Here, popular, generally known as somebody who's single and doesn't marry, but the term really originates from the activity of women spinning. So there's a lot on charkha, and charkha means women. And women, when you talk about women, upper caste males, there is a sense of lasciviousness, of sensuality, and high caste attitudes that comes in. And in fact, one poem is actually very categorically addressed to, quote unquote, the prostitutes. says हुक्म गांधी का सराखों से बजाना होगा, तुमको भी अब चरखा चलाना होगा. And it has such lines as which kind of titillate male fantasy as लेवेंडर सेंट की जगह मेरी परी रूवो, इत्र देसी ही तुम्हें मलना मलाना होगा. स्वराज चलाओ चरखा तो घर बैठे होम रूल मिले, स्वराज लेने तुम्हें दूर न जाना होगा. So actually this is actually in its own way emphasizing spinning, but the language and the sentiments through which it articulates this idea, are reflective of social and sexist attitudes in our society. The last point, of course, is about Khaddar. And again, there are n number of poems that emphasize women really now yearning for saris and phariya, which is short skirt worn by girls, saying, I don't want the fine textured mill-made or European-made sari, I want the rough one. So that is the central message, that we are trying to weave women from wearing machine-made saris and even from cloth imported from the outside by homespun Khaddar saris. But even this noble desire is still not devoid and very much present, in fact, of male voyeuristic attitudes and tendency. So there is as I said, phariya is a small skirt worn by small girls. So that attitude is also present even when talking about girls speaking about themselves. मैं तो जहर मरूंगी खाए मंगा दे फरिया गाढ़े की. The girl saying, I'll kill myself, but I want fariya of gadha, which is the Khaddar. And then the rest of the poem, after this initial move, is really filled with titillating imagery of the girl saying, I don't want this thin diaphanous fariya because, it's really a see-through. I don't want this very, very slippery cloth because it kind of almost slips off. I want the sturdy, hard Khaddar. So that, we get what I'm arguing for, that obviously the overarching theme is of anti-British poetry and pamphlets which are proscribed. But the proscription is of pamphlets which are authored by one section of the Indian population. I'm talking about North India, middle caste, upper caste males in their 20s and 30s. And there is no way, in fact, unless you purge yourself totally of these innate attitudes, and in some ways that is Gandhi's ultimate aim, to decaste oneself, to get rid of the ideas that one is born with and one grows with. Now, unless you do away with that, which is a very, very difficult thing to do, nationalist poetry of a most incendiary, of the most revolutionary, a poetry that is aimed at mobilization, leaves behind for us signs of the people, status, and subject position of those who write it. So nationalism doesn't, at a broad level, doesn't wipe off all the differences that Indian society has. In fact, even in its attempt to be purely nationalist, it shows a lot of itself to ourselves. Thank you.
I was just extending my thanks for dealing into the ideas and emotions that fueled such writings, which were proscribed, and the literary translation of those intent that were there in those writings, the nuances of the imagery, symbolicism into the pamphlets that portrayed the disparities within the nationalist ideas. Because since I am also a student of history, we normally see under this umbrella term of nationalism, all these nuances get ignored at times. So thank you for pointing out, and thank you for taking time for us despite such bad throat. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Divya, and thank you, Ravikant, and thanks everyone very much.